That was a very quick video, and it catches me off guard a little bit. Happy Monday, everyone. Happy day after Easter. I hope everyone had a good break if you got one last week, and a good weekend if you got to spend it with fun people. I don't know if it was your family or not. We are here to continue the conversation. Epic Jedi, Finding Latinx in Search of the Voices, Redefining Latino Identity, Paola Ramos. It's a great book. It's a great read. I'm excited to be able to jump into these themes that are more, close to my personal life, and that I feel like I can speak to more experience. I know, and my guest will bring this up, but we sometimes feel like we can't connect, and I didn't find that to be true with the other two books that we've done, because it just felt like as human beings we have these experiences, and we all live in America, so a lot of us are having these experiences. We're working on chapter 7 today, and it's called Ground Zero. And it's not going to be what you think it is. I think that phrase has been sort of used for 9/11 for so long now that even when I saw it, I was like, this is different. But the focus is going to be Miami, because as she traveled across the United States, we left Texas the last time we were on, and now we're in Florida, specifically Miami. So I'm going to bring on our guests. First, Rich McCrow, thank you for joining us.
Hi, everybody.
And then, to my delight, thank you so much to Mike Walsh for coming back and having this conversation with us.
Howdy. Every time I see us in those sport coats, Richard, I always feel like, oh, I'm underdressed now. I should go put on a jacket.
Oh,
in the promo pics?
In the promos?
Oh, yeah.
Like, I gotta straighten up and sit straight and everything. Yeah. Okay.
People are expecting a tie.
Yeah, I combed my hair. So the least you could do. All right. Before we jump in, because I want to start doing this at the top of the show every time now, because I want people to see. I want to let me hide this real quick. Highlight these two books again. I'm doing this every time because I love authors, and then I love one of these authors more personally because she's a friend. So, but I'm going to do Julie's first. So this is a book that came out last month. You Sound Like a White Girl, The Case for Rejecting Assimilation. She's doing a book tour now. This book is on sale now. So follow her on Instagram. There's clips of her doing some readings and sharing some articles, I think, that she's written, and also different places where she's been talking to people. And then the other one is this, The Ballad of Love and Glory, Reina Grande, close friend, a fellow banana slug. This is her 5th novel, I believe, and this is a historical fiction. Took her a long time to write. Did a lot of research, and it's lovely and wonderful, and I highly recommend both of those books. Okay, back to us. Well, you know what? Since I'm talking about uplifting fellow Latinas, I'm going to drink out of this cup that I put on Instagram earlier, because it's actually iced coffee. It's a tumbler that my cousin makes these. So if you want something cool like this, and then I did want to show, I'm using these. She makes these epic cups that I sent to Keith. Keith, here's your cup. Oh, and it's got my cute little logo on the bottom. But my cousin makes those. She's very talented, and we all have a side hustle. There's a lot of entrepreneurial people in my family, so I wanted to highlight that also. So if you see me pulling this up and taking a sip, just know that, well, actually, you don't know what's in here, so it doesn't matter.
I'm enjoying this show. I'll be right back. I left one in the refrigerator.
Yeah, forget it. You need to forget it. Okay. So this chapter is called Ground Zero, but she's focusing on Miami. which is where she's from. Paola Ramos spent most of her childhood in Spain, in Madrid specifically. Her mom is Spanish, and her dad is Mexican, and she spent, I don't know how they ended up in Miami, but that's where they ended up. So she writes about growing up, experiencing high school, teenage years, and then this idea of leaving this space and then coming back. And I learned about Miami is this idea, because I live in California, and I feel like in some spaces I'm surrounded by people who sound like my family in a lot of spaces. But then you get to a certain I want to say maybe academic or socioeconomic places that then they sound less and less like my family and look a lot less like my family. And so I feel like that was interesting to me, was finding that out about Miami. This place where, everyone understands what that Latino, Latina feeling is. And there's so many people that look like us and sound like us. And then you leave the way that we do when we're growing up, and realizing, that that's not the rest of the United States.
Yeah.
And finding out the hard way. In most ways, you find out the hard way. So any thoughts before we jump into quotes that I'll pull out of the chapter?
Yeah, what you're describing reminds me of there's some great work by Ruby Payne, Framework for Understanding Poverty, and she talks about when you go from poverty to middle class, there's the change that comes with that is that you're no longer feeling quite. It almost relates back to being in the bubble, that you've left and then you come back home and you've had this different experience, different languages, not languages, but the way you talk, because now I've been to college and I've got my degree. And so my level of language, the discourse that I have, it changes. And so that's when people come back home and they're said, we hear that thing about, like you were just describing, not quite the same as I thought I was, because things are different now. Life has expanded. And so I think for a lot of folks, that becomes that fear that my child is going to go away. And when they come back to visit, in Black homes, the phraseology when you come back is, you're a little bougie now. You go away, now you're too good to be here.
Yeah.
Right? And no, I still, this is, I'm home, but and it's so hard to explain, but it's exactly what you just described. All of a sudden you're gone, you come back, and it's like, I now know what else is out there.
I mean, I said I was a banana slug, so people know.
But going to Santa Cruz was getting out of your bubble, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it didn't even occur to me, especially while I was there, because I don't know how this is going to sound, but whatever. I spent a lot of time in high school in the early 90s. From 90 to 94 was when I went to high school. And I spent a lot of time in honors classes. There was no AP at my high school. I want to say at that time, but I don't know. So it was honors. And so it was just that environment where there were, even though we were in the area that we are in the Central Valley, and the majority, I want to say, of the population of the high school itself was not necessarily all white, but I was surrounded by kids who only spoke English, did not sound like my family at all. And I want to say didn't look like me, but my very light skin. So I think I just blended in, and I didn't speak in Spanish to anyone during those 4 years. And I didn't even realize there was anything wrong with that, right? Because of growing up, my parents were like, go to school, get good grades, get a job, because it wasn't even about going to college at that point. It was just like, be successful, but stay home. So this idea that in this area that I grew up should look different at all levels was like totally lost on me. So when I went to Santa Cruz, it felt the same as high school, right? I didn't notice. I feel awful about it, but I did find, actually, Reina is one of the people that I met there. We graduated together from the same college at the university. So I feel really lucky to have found that,
Mhm.
but I wasn't seeking it out. I mean, I feel embarrassed to say that, but it didn't even occur to me, which really sucks. But coming home, it was sort of like that. I'm different. I care about different things. I want to talk about different things. I'm interested in different things. And it was difficult. It was difficult because it was one, already being an outsider in terms of the family because I was taking honors classes. And then going away to school was another thing that was like totally different. And then coming back instead of like staying away. So coming back into that family bubble, and into the Central Valley and being in this space and figuring out, oh, this is what I really want to do. And so that's how education came into my life. But that idea that I went somewhere and didn't even notice and it didn't even cross my mind that I was missing out on something, awful. And I'm sure if I talk to my parents about this, they'll be like, we did the best we could. I'm like, well, yeah, you guys were not saying go out there and speak all the Spanish and get a tan and make sure you stand out in the sea of white faces. They were not going to say that. And so you come back and then it seems like you're not identifying with the family. Then it's like, wait a minute. Like, you should know
Well,
better. And I'm like, nobody told me. Nobody told me.
and I think there's a lot that goes with that is I don't know what it is. I don't know until I go see it. And once I've been, so I leave. So I grew up in Inglewood until I was 12, and then moved up here to the northern parts of California, which are nothing like Inglewood. So I left the bubble, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't realize it was a bubble until I went back 2 or 3 years later as a child to go visit some of went to go visit my mother and went to go visit some of my best friends from school, and it was I had officially become a hick, as I call my kids, because all of a sudden everything about LA was moving way too fast for me, and I just felt the stress level, and I started thinking to myself, "Whoa, what is going on? I don't understand it." And I remember while I was out playing basketball with my buddies, I strained my neck, and the muscle just seized up, and it was the first time I ever had that happen in my life, to the point where I had to walk home like a mile with my head turned because the muscle seized up so badly I couldn't turn. And when we took me to the doctor, they said, "Oh, don't worry, it's stress." I'm like, stress? I'm a 14-year-old kid. What the heck do I have stress about? Can't move. Yeah. And so I think it's that thing where once you go away, I could only imagine what it would be like to go away for college and then come back home, and nothing at home has changed. It's just that my awareness of everything else that's out there has changed. So I can imagine coming home, because when I went back to LA, I was kind of casual. I was very careful about where I sat, what I touched, what I did. And all of a sudden it was very foreign, where 3 years prior, no big deal. It was totally normal. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So I would imagine for you to go away to UC Santa Cruz and then come back down to Central California and see the difference, and all of a sudden you notice that stuff, that's got to play on you immediately.
Oh,
So I
yeah.
think a lot of people struggle with that. But that's where I think that's where a lot of the folks who are at home kind of take it personal. Like, what's the matter? You too good to be here? Now you're a college educated. So what's the deal? I'm like, no. Well, I mean, yes. I mean, oh my God, I feel bad.
Am I supposed to say yes?
No. Even though everybody can see it, right? Because I'm a little cautious about where I sit, what I touch, what I drink. And it's like, well, no, this is what I drink in college is I drink, whatever kind of special water. Like, what's wrong with the tap? What's wrong with the faucet? Yeah, too good? No, I just don't drink out of water hoses anymore. Like, I don't know
Yes.
why. I just don't do it anymore. But I know when I was a kid, never thought twice about it. So it's this really odd thing that the stuff that I grew up around, I never thought twice about it, left it, went back to it. Then it became very odd. I'm like, oh my goodness, that never occurred to me in the past. Why is it occurring to me now? So I would absolutely imagine that was part of your experience to come home.
Yeah, I want to I'm going to bring this kind of a long quote, but so she says, it's almost as if I felt some sort of resentment toward the city that gave birth to me, some kind of anger, perhaps a rationale for making me see the world and myself in such a one-dimensional way. And so again, she was describing what it was like growing up in an area where people looked and sounded like her family. And the percentage of Latinos in that area and in her neighborhood and in her school And it just seemed like this is just the way Latinos are accepted everywhere we go, everywhere we look. This city is America, and we're all in it. And everywhere we go in America, this is what it's going to be like. Acceptance, hearing Spanish being spoken everywhere you go, you know, that kind of thing. And then you go away and you realize that's not, she says, you know, she was only looking at herself in this one way, not realizing. And this is how I connected to this, not realizing that there were all of these levels to our identity and not really finding that purpose. And that's a quote I'll pull up later, but not really finding what that meant to me as a person, that I didn't actually connect with those identities. It was just like this one thing. And I've been asked, actually only one person, and I don't think she liked me, why I identified as Mexican, because I wasn't born in Mexico. It's an older lady, and it really bothered her that I would say that that my family was Mexican, and so that I was Mexican. I wasn't even saying Mexican American at that point. I'd already graduated from college. I was just saying Mexican, and she's like, "But you were born here." I'm like, in my head, I'm like, "What do you care?" You, lady. You know, but that's someone else like putting their own. It was a white lady, obviously. Obviously, it was a white lady.
I was already there. I was already at
I'm
that
just
point.
clarifying for Richard that it was a white lady.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
But it just bothered her. It really bothered her, and I'm like, I think at that point I really was like kind of coming into my own identity as a Latina. And at that point, I wasn't using that word because it hadn't really occurred to me to use that word. And I want to show a video. This is part of why I think it can be confusing to people, especially with those of us that have light skin and light colored eyes. There's
Or
this
sound like we have light skinned and light colored eyes. The
on
sound
the
also
phone.
works. Yes.
So yes. Okay, I hope this works, because on Instagram, as soon as like you pop into that page, it starts playing. So I hope that you'll be able to hear it as soon as I share it. This girl is, I mean, it makes me laugh, but there's a comment. If you look on the video, there's a comment about like, this is just another white girl pretending to be Latina. And she starts the video in Spanish, but she will switch to English and kind of explain. And I think it's perfect for this chapter because we will be talking about light-skinned Cubans, privilege, and those kinds of things a little bit, and what that means when other people are coming, and also other Americans who live, like, you know, in Puerto Rico. Okay, let me see if I can pull it up. Bear with me.
¿Qué más puedo hacer, güey? At this point, I'm guessing it's because people don't understand what the term Latina means. Let me just shed some light on the term. Latino, Latina is shorthand for Latinoamericano, okay? And it means anybody born in or with ancestors who are from Latin America. Now, half of my family, on my mom's side, including my mom, is from Mexico, like born and raised in Mexico. Now, they are also white, okay? That does not make them any less Mexican. Now, in my case, I was born in the United States, but my mom wasn't, nor were my grandparents on that side. Therefore, I am Latina. Now, if I was from Spain, then yeah, okay, but my family's not. Que en serio, ya no puedo con esta gente.
So at the end, she's saying, you know, I can't with these people. I can't with these people. They see my skin and they're like, you're a white girl. Why are you talking about how you're Mexican? It just like really, really emphasizes how we don't understand just like the history of humanity and how it works, that people, that borders are not like part of the landscape, that we created those borders, and we decided that if you're over there, you're that, and if you're over there, you're that. It's just, I just think she's so funny. I love watching that video.
I have to admit, I am at the point now where I've come to the conclusion in the last 10 years or so, I have zero clue what ethnicity anyone is. I no longer try and guess. I'm horrible at it, and I have accepted that. So for me to see her and find out that she's Latina, no surprise. I'm like, okay, all right, I guessed wrong again. And so it's becoming more and more of the world, and I just accept it. Yeah, I limited knowledge, which has been one of the fascinating things about all the reading and the learning that has been going on over the last few years. I'm discovering more and more how limited my knowledge really is. Like, gee, how wrong I've been in the past.
Okay, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because we've talked about a lot of this and get a little more political, maybe. So there's this idea of finding ourselves, leaning into an identity or a group on the census form or whatever, as much as they try to, I don't know if they really try to figure out, what we need to be putting down. So this idea, this navigating this system that we think is ours to begin with, by blood and on paper, especially if you're born in the United States, but was never really ours to belong in. We talked about this last time with this idea of the system's not built for firsts, people who are the first. When we talked about caste, we're talking about the system is built on white supremacy. So anything that's not white, doesn't look white, doesn't sound white, is just gonna struggle to be in it. I think it was Keith and I that were having a conversation about reading books about business and learning all of this stuff, finances and being an entrepreneur. And he's like, I've spent so many years studying and trying to build a business, and I feel like I'm failing. But then I have to remind myself, and not in a like failure sort of way or in a defeatist sort of way, but the system was not built for people like me. And so I need to figure out which books are actually giving me the right message so that I'm not feeling like I don't fit because that book says that I don't fit. So this idea, by blood and by paper. So, I mean, I know you guys are reading this and you're saying, that there's some connection here that maybe people or to your own lives. By blood and on paper. What does this mean to you?
So I would say where this really connects back for me is this notion of being reminded that I am Black. That from time to time, there are things that come up that remind me that I'm Black and that I still have to justify because I'm one of those first. I'm one of the first, and I relate so much to what Keith was saying. So I'm the first Black county board member, county trustee here in Butte County. And every now and then the surprise of that or the shock of that or the whatever it is that I live with is I'm reminded of it. And not necessarily always in a negative way, but when so I built my whole life in education. And from time to time, when I show up at certain schools, I still have to go directly to the office to explain who I am, show proof who I am, and make sure everybody knows, calm down, relax. I'm a school board guy. It's not someone you need to be nervous about it here on the campus. So some of the times that's part of my reminder. And other times it's just a lot of different things that have happened throughout my family, those reminders. And it's like, oh, that's right. I'm here, but I still have to explain why I'm here. And I even had somebody question me not too long ago that as we were talking about immigration, I said, well, I didn't immigrate. My family, we were kidnapped and brought over here. Oh, how do you know? Huh? Like, how do you know that you that you didn't immigrate? And I almost looked around like, huh? I got to explain this. So there's these different moments every now and then. And it was a friend who was asking me this question. And I got why he was asking. And I was fine, but it was the shock of the question, and that I have to justify again that, look, I'm here, I'm part. And so, yeah, all of those things flow back and forth. And there's a consistent reminder that I'm here, but I'm still earning the right to be here, that I got to be more American. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, I don't know how much more American I have to be, but all right, I figure it out, I guess.
Richard, do you have a comment?
No, I is it too loud?
No, I was just cutting you off.
Oh, no, I think about the blood and on paper, and I'm thinking about the connections that I have through, my home in Spokane, Washington, and the people that I hung around, and you know where in the privilege that I had, it's neglecting to utilize it, but then knowing that I had friends, that didn't have the privilege that I had, and I didn't even recognize it at the time. And so I wouldn't be able to tell you that it's an identity. I wouldn't be able to tell you that it was a system, because until I left my own bubble and then went back, and Letty, you've been back, where I'm just shocked at my hometown and a lot of the racism that goes on. And it's like, I grew up here. Like, I still ask myself that. And there's good people there. There's family there that I love. But when I go there and then neighbors that I knew start saying racist crap, and then I'm like, what in the world? Was I hearing this when I was a kid? Because I don't remember it. But as an adult, it's just glaring. And so I don't know how that connection is, and how it affects my identity. But definitely people that of color that live in Spokane, the trauma that they must go through on a daily basis, because it does have a lot of racism in that town.
See, I can relate totally to what you just said, Richard, because that has been some of my connections. That's where even having grown up here where I live now, still in Oroville, I'm amazed that sometimes when I do go away and I come home, right, I'm off away on business or whatever, and I'll come home and try and catch up on what's going on in the neighborhood. And then I hear about those things, or I see those things on Facebook and post the people that I graduated from high school with. And I'm with you, like that moment of, did we grow up together? Because man, this is that's some of the stuff that just came out of your mouth. If I had heard that when we were kids, we wouldn't have been friends. There wouldn't have been a relationship. And so, that's why I say, I figure every now and then I hear some of those things and I realize, I still have work to do. I still have to prove myself again. And I don't want to prove myself. I'm done. And, but still knowing that there's still this thing that I carry.
So this is a good example of being American, or what we think means, what that means of being American. In all these different ways that people still have to prove themselves when they don't fit into that white supremacist ideal. These Puerto Rican students who, especially after Hurricane Maria, were trying to figure out what they were going to do with their lives. And not that students don't come into the mainland to study or work, but there was a very specific group. I mean, that number really grew, obviously, during that time, because it just wasn't available on the island anymore. But she talked to several, Paola Ramos talked to several students who had left Puerto Rico to go to Florida to study. And they were talking about friends that they were in these programs with that they just couldn't assimilate. And so this to me is it's a big thing about, it's a big idea. And one of the students says, Americans don't know their own history. But this idea that you're constantly, a foreigner, we talked about this in previous chapters. So if you're coming, you're speaking English because you're in American territory. American history because you're taught it in the schools. It's all part of the same. I mean, we're not going to go down the, why aren't they a state conversation. But this idea that as Americans, we look at a place like Puerto Rico and we're like, that's like another country. That's out of, that's not us. That's not America. They're not American. They don't sound like me. They don't dress like me. Their families don't look like mine. But then there are some students that just either don't want to or can't fit in. And so this is what I love about Julisa's book. Let me bring it back up. You sound like a white girl. And so she talks about like the case for rejecting assimilation, what she lost in sounding like a white girl, more American, right? Instead of being herself, being true to her. There's another author who has 4, I think I have her book here. let's shout out another author while I'm at it. Prisa Dorcas Mojica Rodriguez. And she said, I got to the point where I'm just going to start using all 4 of the names. And I'm not going to answer if you don't call me all 4 of my names. Social media, contracts, in conversations. She's like, there's no reason for me to give up my mother's name. There's no reason for me to not have my middle name. Like, why? Like this idea that we make fun of people of Latin American descent because they're using all these names. She's like, no, fuck that. I'm using all my names. You're going to start using all my names. So there's like, I'm not assimilating. This is me. I'm American. I was born here. These are the names I was given. And this is how I identify. And this is how you're going to have conversation with me. This is how you're going to engage with me. But it's just so difficult. That firsts, right? It's just so difficult. So this is so sad to me that students are in places where they can't even go and get like that degree because everything else around them is telling them that they don't belong.
And I think the assimilation conversation is important because it's, we talk about it in schools, right? We talk about engagement. Do you feel like you're welcome, you're engaged, etc.? Do you feel like you belong? And I know there have been a few, I've lived in a couple places after I unsuccessful. So you brag about you boast happily about being a banana slug. And I should be able to boast about being a wildcat. But my first year at Chico State was not all that successful. I wrestled, had a great time, but then they said, you should be going to your other classes. And I went, oh, okay, I guess I should leave now. And so I've lived in a couple different places. And there were a few of the towns like Merced. I love Merced, but I never really felt connected to Merced. I was there for about a year and a half, never quite connected. Moved down to Lancaster for a little while. And, as much as I enjoyed the 400-mile-an-hour winds out of the desert, golly gosh, never felt connected there either. So there's been a few places that I've lived that it never quite felt right. And so I can imagine for those people who don't feel like they've assimilated or struggle with that, especially now they're back to Puerto Rico, because they just didn't feel like they connected. That's got to be a part of it because we're constantly being told no one comes up to us and says it explicitly, you must behave like a white person. But there's a clear message that that's the culture that I must now assimilate to be fully accepted. And if I don't, if I speak a certain way, and again, I'm on the privileged end of this when I'm on the phone because I don't have that black vernacular. And so I code switch, is how we call it. We refer to it. And so I'm very good at code switching. My grandmother must have understood that back in the 70s. And she was very clear about that. So it's interesting for me that as I read this book, when I didn't think I'd connect to it at all, I'm amazed at how much I've connected. And Richard and I were talking earlier about the fact that I have learned so much. I think you referenced this as you were opening the show, Letty, but I'm amazed at how much of this I'm really starting to understand and realize. I've got a lot of friends who are going through this right now who are Hispanic and Latin or whatever. I don't even know what to call them anymore. I don't know what term to use. And so I'm very aware that, man, they've gone through some stuff and they still, because of the skin tone or the accent, they're reproving themselves at a level that I've never, ever had to deal with, thankfully. So again, there's some privilege with that, but I can understand and I can accept the fact that when they don't feel like they connect, you go back to where you do feel like you connect, you do feel home. And that's, whether it's another country or going back to the home of where you were living, where there was a lot of poverty. It's just a sense of it's hard to touch or put my fingers on it, but I don't feel connected. So I'm going to go back to over here.
Yes. And there's, I remember having conversations a couple of years ago when we started CARE. We were having a lot of conversations about inviting, we wanted more people to be involved in the conversation. But it did get to the point where it felt like suddenly we had to be, not that anyone made us feel like we needed to be careful, but we felt like we really want a space where it could be just us. And when we were saying us, we were saying women of color. It wasn't even like, because we were all women. So it was like, can we just like sometimes have a space where it's just us and we can like bitch about how awful it is sometimes. And it was an argument. It went so badly to ask, like, can we just have this space? You know, it was difficult. And I think that maybe people get offended, or you want to feel like you're being inclusive, but then it's like what you were saying, what we're talking about. If we don't feel safe, if we just want to go back where we're comfortable, sometimes we don't always have to be trying to accept or trying to fit in at our expense. And that's what that ended up feeling like. And so for like these students, I feel like that decision to have to make that decision to like, I came here and now I have to go back home because I just can't. Like, I can't even imagine like the mental turmoil,
Thank you.
the amount of stress that must have caused, like to not even be able to think in your classes, like to not even be able to go to your classes. And you're like, I'm out. I gotta go back home. I need to hear people speak Spanish. That is such a comforting thing. I don't know if you understand. It's like comfort food, right? If you're around people who are speaking the language, it's a different level of comfort.
That's why I say I excel at code switching.
Mm-hmm.
So when I visit my friends who look like me, there will be a different conversation that'll happen.
Right.
And it's I'm good with that. I appreciate it. And so the gentleman that I train with, he and I went to high school and we competed against each other. And about 3 or 4 months ago, I finally said, I need to start working out consistently. So Tracy, let's start working out together. And when Tracy and I get together, black man like myself, and has just slightly more hair than me. Right? So when we get together, we have conversations, and that's been the most interesting thing that we were neither of us were really expecting it, but our conversations are very real. And it's like it's a very personal conversation, and all of a sudden, my language, the way I'm speaking, it shifts, and he and I become very comfortable, and we say stuff that we don't even think twice about. But I promise you, if another individual showed up, whatever color, it could be Richard, it could be Letty, it could be anyone, all of a sudden, we're going to be a little bit more careful, all right? Especially, I'll take that back. Another good friend of mine is Juan came out and was laughing and giggling with us, and there was no problem whatsoever. But I guarantee you, Richard, and this isn't about you, it's literally, and it might not be you because I have a lot more comfort around you, but I guarantee you, Tracy doesn't have the same comfort with you. So awareness of how we're speaking will change. Right. But when everybody's gone, it's just Tracy and I, we get to the point where it's just a couple brothers out hanging out, running and working out, and having a good time talking about the old days. And all of a sudden it shifts a little bit. None that nobody else could hear.
I think that's too some of the arrogance of white privilege is that white people don't experience that. White people walk into any scenario thinking that it's not all white people, but a lot of white people walk into any scenario and think that they're the center of the universe. And they don't adapt, they don't change, they just continue with themselves. And that's, I think, part of the problem.
And it is. I love we're playing with a lot of broad brushes, and we're trying to be very careful with it. But it's so okay. For me, I think you're right. It's like when walking in, like, how do you show up and still the affinity groups is what I've talked to people about before. Yes. Like I struggle with affinity groups because it's always about purpose. If the purpose of us right now, where I've worked in some workshops before, and in another fellow program, a program was part of my fellowship, and the work was supposed to be about getting comfortable with uncomfortable conversations. And I thought, okay, if the goal is to be uncomfortable or to be comfortable in these uncomfortable conversations, we shouldn't have separate affinity groups. We should be in and other people argued for it. And I was like, I'm struggling with this one. I think when they serve a purpose, if it's because we want to just completely air it out, okay, make them separate affinity groups. But if it's about the opportunity for Richard to be in the room when Tracy and I are completely and totally ourselves, then we're all going to have to be uncomfortable with that, including Richard. And I need him to hear it. I need him to express he's a little uncomfortable with it. And we need to walk him through that at the same time. And because quite frankly, that's been my life. And Letty, I'm going to jump out there and say that's been your life. That's the story that they're having here, is that
Right.
if you're if you're in that white group, you're in that position of majority still, then we all have to come and we have to assimilate and we have to change so that you're not uncomfortable. Right? And it's not the other way around. Unless, Richard, you come to my neighborhood where I grew up, where everyone looks like me. You come to Inglewood and hang out for 2 weeks. You're going to be uncomfortable for a while until you realize, there's nothing here to be uncomfortable about. This is just everybody relax, having a good time. And you'll you'll be the next guy who will pick up dominoes, and you won't refer to them as dominoes. You'll call them bones. And when you're playing, you'll slam the table just like everybody else in my neighborhood. And you'll yell and cuss and holler. And suddenly you'll realize, oh, you've assimilated into this culture. And that's what that comes down to. So I hear what you're saying, that your group, the white folks, again, broad brush in general, have never been forced to assimilate into another community. That's not normal. That's not a natural experience. So I think you're right on there when you say that.
Amy's blowing up our comment section, so I wanted to share some of her comments. She's thank you for chiming in. She's saying you don't have to be politically correct all the time when I was talking about, these groups. And then she's commenting on what you just said about, I mean, honestly, because we're talking about whose comfort and who's the one that's in control, right? So these ideas they're not new. I think people who are not experiencing these things might have an argument because they've never, like Richard was saying, I've never experienced these specific things that you're talking about. The feelings might be familiar because we all, at some point, maybe there's a sense of not belonging somewhere, being an outsider in one or two situations in our lives where we really start to feel like, oh my God, do I deserve to be here? And all those things start to creep in, but it's not just a daily fact of being the human in that skin. So
I like what you said. Well, I love what you just said, because that is the thing of the thing that I always hear from people. Well, I've experienced that. And I name 1 or 2 times of experience. And I always want to say, good. Imagine what it would be like to experience that on a daily basis, multiple times throughout the day, simply because you have an accent. And now you experience that all of the time. That thing that we refer to as microaggressions that everybody tends to, oh, stop it. You're so childish. You're so immature. You're so sensitive. Like, well, if you experience it once or twice in your lifetime, it's not a big deal. But if you experience it all of the time, every day, because of your language or the color of your skin, it's no longer this little thing that you don't have to let affect you. Look, it's going to affect you if it happens that often.
Right.
So yeah, thank you for letting me jump in there. You go. It's your show. Carry on. I'll act like a guest now.
Well, we're going to shift a little bit, but this idea of identity and how we're viewed makes a lot of sense with this. This section of the chapter is called The New Voter, and it was about a previously incarcerated person that she talked to. His name was Angel. This is a quote from him. When you're treated like a gang member, you act like a gang member. When you're met with aggression, you react with violence. And when you're told you're nobody, you believe it. So he's talking about the neighborhood he grew up in, being a kid, like we're talking like pre-pubescent, and then through his teenage years. And the kind of trouble that they got in because there was just nothing else to do in that neighborhood. And so it was just constantly being in trouble. And then this is why you get a reputation with law enforcement, with educators, with anyone who is supposed to be there to help lift you up and educate you in and out of the classroom. This just becomes part of your identity, and that's how you're treated. And then this was the end of that paragraph, especially when no one around you is there to tell you otherwise. So even growing up in a neighborhood that was there's probably Latinos everywhere. And like I'm saying, like the language is Spanish, but those those people are not patrolling themselves, right? This is another issue with law enforcement, is people from outside the neighborhood are patrolling those streets, treating kids like gang members, even if they aren't, based on the language they're speaking, the accent they have, the color of their skin, and how much you're having to fight for just like the right to vote, right? In Florida. And so we can talk about this a little bit. The thing about identity, if you do find it, it gives you purpose. And this was what he was talking about, because he spent 12 years locked up. He was in prison for 12 years. I don't know if it was like a third strike thing or something. But so he's saying, I discovered, like I figured out who I was, and I could identify with that outside of my neighborhood. And then it gives you purpose. So this is what she was saying. These are not his words. This is what she was saying in that paragraph. This resonates with me. So I wanted to hear what you guys thought about this.
I would love to hear why it resonated with you.
Well, it was like I was saying about Santa Cruz, right? And not connecting necessarily with, like, I was a theater student, so I connected with the theater students, and I love music and performance and all of those things. That became my identity. That was my identity. But then when I graduate and come home and I'm living here in this space with family and trying to, because, once I started subbing, I realized I loved being in the classroom. So then it sort of shifted to teacher, right? So then it was like, oh, I'm an educator. I'm going to be an educator. That's my identity. And it really wasn't until I got my own classroom. I started teaching third grade, the most adorable human beings on the planet. Having to do parent-teacher conferences and realizing that I had something that none of the other teachers in that grade level had. I could be one of their daughters, right? I could be one of their sisters. I was a part of that community. So that was a game changer for me. And I'm sure that if, like, I talked to my parents about this, they'd be like, what are you talking about? Why was that the moment? I was like, no, okay, I had a quinceañera, spoke Spanish my whole life. I had to learn English when I went to kinder, like all that stuff. But very quickly I don't want to say forced, but very quickly I was put into that category of, this child has assimilated, right? So you move along, they put you in those honors classes, you graduate, you get scholarships, you go to Santa Cruz and nobody's shocked that you're going to Santa Cruz. Then you come back and you're acting like a theater student. You're so different. But then you get into that classroom and you realize, I can speak Spanish with these parents and I really give a shit about what they have to say, what they're worried about. I care about their kids. I care about this rural community and what's happening to them, what their work is, what their families are like. And that's really when I realized that. So I was 23, I think, when it was finally like, holy shit, I'm Latina, you guys. I also had two really good friends that I met, two really good friends who lived in that rural community. And so we spent our time speaking in Spanish on campus, going out to lunch to get, home cooked meals from like their parents and their families. And so I had like my own little group, and that really helped. That helped me kind of like, okay, I got this. I know who I am now. And then it's just been like smooth sailing since then.
Yeah.
Well, now think about this. Everything you just described is the equivalent to what he described. Angel described it about being part of a gang. He's connected, he's recognized, they're taking care of each other. And the more bad things you do, the more you recognize, the more you belong. It's exactly, I'm thrilled that you explained it that way for yourself, because that's literally the reason why gangs are so powerful for folks, because we don't want the identity. Like I was ever in a gang. Yeah, I don't even know how to throw a gang sign. Let me stop that right there. When you think about it, it's the identity, because that person hasn't found a connection elsewhere that will provide them with love, recognition, skill development. We're going to train you. We're going to help you develop all this stuff. That's never happened outside of the gang. So when they hit the gang, all of a sudden, family, we're going to take care of you. Don't worry about whatever goes on. You're one of us to the day you die, or you get jumped out. You may almost die on the way out. We're going to make sure that you're recognized, and the higher up in the gang you go, the more admiration, the more you'll be adored by the rest of all of that stuff is why gangs are so popular in those areas, those locations, because it's everything about my identity and it gives me a purpose, which is the wonderful thing about, how he talks about how he got out of it. It was just, he discovered a new opportunity to be identified, and he's in law. And I'm betting that he would have the same exact conversation about his discoveries, his new identity that you just had, that finally I found where I belong. And here's my purpose, is to help cut that road, that pipeline, help do something about that and divert kids out of it so they have this other opportunity. So I think, I love your description. Perfect. Because right now I would even say I haven't experienced it that way. But I am in that point now where I'm starting to really question the things that fit my identity, how I see myself. And I'm an old guy now. I am 585 years old or something like that. I don't know. It's way up there. And so I'm at the point now where I am really trying to think, what is the work? What are the options that I have, the activities available to me that fit me and the identity that I have at this moment? It's no longer the other way around, where I'm trying to chase it. Like going through college, really wanted to figure out where did I belong, what I want to do. Too old for that now. I am now trying to figure out what are all the options out in front of me that, that fits because it feels like it's part of my identity. All right, I'll do that one. Never mind all these other ones. I don't have time to experiment anymore. So I think identity is a wonderful thing. It just takes a while, and I can completely appreciate how this worked out for Angel and just the conversation. So I'm there. Yes. I love, you're doing great tonight. I should sit and listen more often.
You know what? It's this. We have some comments. Let me pull up some comments here. So we've got Dr. Dermola. Accent comments on a daily basis from Black and White. So maybe this is like the code switching. And it's, oh my gosh, all the time. It causes me, and I feel like people like me who have a little bit of anxiety, it causes even more stress and anxiety. And I know people have questioned me like, well, why are you so stressed out about that? It's like, you don't understand. It's like, even though I'm not speaking Spanish consistently all day long, I still have to translate some stuff in here. It's still in Spanish and has to come out this way in English. So there's still some struggles with that.
When I love his other statement, can you pull this one up where I tell people everybody has an accent?
Yes.
Can you pull it up? Here's where it never occurred to me until I went out to Mississippi one time to work with some students. And one of the young ladies, I'm telling, yes, I thought she had an accent until I get out there. And I love this statement. So thank you, Charles, for sharing this one with us, because I'm working with fifth graders and I'm meeting them and I'm having a conversation. These three little girls, fifth grade girls, and all three of them, two of them are Black, one is white. And I remember one of the Black girls looking at me going, dang, you talk fast. What are you talking about? You talk funny. You got an accent. And I'm looking at her, and I was, playing with her at first, but I was like, what do you mean I have an accent? I don't hear an accent. You have an accent. No, girl, don't listen to him, girl. Don't he talk funny? And I'm like, oh my God, I guess I do have an accent to these young ladies because I'm from a different place. And it never, ever occurred to me. I'm like, California, hey, how egocentric can I possibly be?
I know, we're so egocentric.
Oh, my goodness. So I love that comment. Everybody has an accent. And it's, again, if I were to spend a lot of time in Mississippi, because all of a sudden my voice starts to change, and I do recognize when I'm out there for any length of time, in the South especially, suddenly I get a little bit slower in my conversation and my voice changes just a little bit. Y'all just got to understand. Come on over here and have a seat. Now sit down, set a spell. That's not me, but once I'm there, I will assimilate and it will start to happen.
So interesting. Amy also shared, we were talking about Angel. Victor Rios talks about this in his work. Just throwing that name out there. If you're interested, look him up. Very interesting work. Very cool. Okay, let's go back. We still have so much to cover. Okay. We have 6 minutes. I want to bring this one up before we get too far into the last sort of section of this chapter. It's kind of a long chapter because she covered so much in this whole Miami being ground zero. There's like all of these things. I think that people forget.
Yeah.
What?
I was going to say, can you imagine what was going through her mind? That was her hometown where she was born and raised, and why this chapter was so long, because there was so much to talk about that she recognized.
So this comes sort of as maybe a surprise to some people I think I was surprised. This idea that Puerto Rico had the largest Chinatown in Latin America. Was it the largest or the second largest? I think the largest.
Largest.
Chinese Cuban community. And then the idea that, just like that video of the girl on the woman, I need to stop saying girl, on Instagram, like you look a certain way and you speak a certain way. When she was rattling her Spanish off, I did not hear any kind of accent, but that just might be my own, Spanglish ears. So this idea that even in these different cultural communities and different parts of Latin America, that there are these Asian, maybe European, maybe African communities, because like we were saying at the beginning, like humanity migrates. This is not like there's no lines and you say like you can't identify one way or another. This idea that there are over 100,000 people of Chinese descent, living in a community in Cuba or in Puerto Rico or anywhere else in Latin America, that we can't, like, we're not even thinking about that. Like
my mind was blown.
I was like,
mine was blown immediately. Like I never ever considered the notion of Chinese Cubans. What? Okay, which makes total sense. Chinese Americans. Okay, so why not? Again, I think, and a part of it is just that we're not exposed to the rest of the world. We have such a narrow perspective of the rest of the world that I think it's what makes it so critical. And I hate to draw us back to, because we're like, well, we may be close to it, but there's one part where, because the chapter is pretty long, where she talks about, it's not a matter of agreeing or disagreeing with her. She's referring to the young lady who won.
Leonis.
Yes, Leonis. I was hoping you would say her name because I wasn't quite sure if I got it right. And I didn't want to get harassed by Richard. And so as Leonis is talking about it, she says, it's not a matter of agreeing or disagreeing with her. It's her truth, her lived experience, and her reality and her skin. We just don't get out enough to understand other people's realities about their world and what it's like. And so we show up with our preconceived notions of what we think it should be like, which is wherever I came from. Wherever I come from is what the rest of the world should look like. And then every place I've traveled, I've only got 4 stamps in my passport, but every time I've traveled, I'm amazed at what I see. And that's even around the United States. I'm amazed at some stuff, but more so when I go overseas and suddenly my eyes are open, like, oh, I had zero clue. Wow, I'm blown away. And all of a sudden I become humble.
Yeah, I'm going to bring this. This was a few, pages back, but this is going to speak to what I'm going to talk about next. So this elite, so we're going to say this, not being from Miami, not being from Florida, and not being Cuban. But this reputation, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but this reputation of the Cuban exile and their place in Florida politically, the kinds of acceptance that they've what's the word? We're privileged to, maybe. So this is, I know this only from like maybe Spanish language news or shows or conversations. This idea that the Miami Cuban community, very interested in status and success and recognition, are determined by the lightness of their skin. And so when you have Leonis, going into the beauty pageant scene and that idea that she's missing the top prize by like 1 or 2 points. I mean, it doesn't say like racism, but you're like, okay, white supremacy. and then finding a community that accepts her as a Latina and as an Afro-Latina, right? And then being the first Latina to win this prize, because she's like, I was accepted not by my Cuban counterparts. I was accepted not by the Miami scene. I was accepted first by the Black community. And I can come in here and hold both of those identities together and win a prize like this and feel confident in my identity. That, I mean, the idea that we're constantly forcing people to choose and that we're constantly telling people the lighter your skin, the better your life will be. It's like, it just still blows my mind. These are recent things. We're not talking about the past, right? This is like within the last few years for young people, not people growing up, 40 years ago. So we're gonna point out some things about Miami. These are not our words, okay? So this line of descriptions that Paola Ramos puts together. So this is a city filled by immigrants, yet one that rejects its sanctuary status. A city full of wealth, but one with the nation's highest income inequalities. A city governed by Cubans, yet one that raises the bar for other Latin Americans. And so this leads to this new exile, right? People from Venezuela. And again, if you're not paying attention historically, if you're not watching the news on a regular basis, if you don't understand, again, when people are migrating through different countries, if you're only paying attention to immigration at our southern border and what that means to Texas, then you're not going to understand this. We should be paying attention because these people, I love, I didn't put it down, but when she was talking about being loud and wanting attention, with the same fervor that Cubans had, but without any of the protections. I was like, these people have been through some shit and they're not gonna just sit in the shadows and wait to see what happens. They want you to know, the same way that Angel said, when I talk to people and I meet them for the first time, I tell them, I am this, I am this, I am this, and prison comes up every time. And they're going to know right off the bat who I am and where I came from. And I feel like this was the same sort of message that Venezuelans were kind of giving off as the new exile in Miami. What do you think?
I think that one of the reasons why we struggle with this notion of immigration and exiles, et cetera, is because we have this weird thing, and I kind of picked up on it as I was reading this part of the book, that you may be coming here, right? We have this fight about the border and that you got to come here correctly or whatever, everything else. And I think part of that, we have such a notion of scarcity. There's only so much. No, there's plenty, but not in our minds. In our minds, we say there's only so much. And every person who comes over, there goes a job now. There goes a stop it. There's plenty of jobs. There's plenty of work. And by the way, those folks who are coming over, we're not giving them the status that says they can go over and take the really high paying job. They're doing the whatever they can find to do. So stop whining. It's work you don't want to do anyhow. But we stop our conversation at they're coming over here. Look at the mess at the border. And we rarely talk about what in the world is driving these people, whoever is trying to walk across all of this distance. I'm not going to walk from California to Seattle. Forget it. No, I don't need to go to Seattle that badly. So when we think about these people who are walking, they're doing anything they can to move thousands of miles to get to the border. We really should be asking the question, what's going on down there? How do we help do some things around that so that there's not such a flood? Or if there's nothing we can do about that, then how do we open it up so that we can treat them the way we did with Cubans? You're escaping. We didn't question, why are you trying to escape? Well, Fidel was already the enemy of the United States. And so come on over. All right, so why can't we take that time to do the same thing for the rest of it? I don't know fully, but I struggle with that because we stop with look, I got here legally. My family got here legally. You can do the rest of it. Get in line. Give it. Yeah, you've never experienced this stuff. Otherwise, you would have already opened up the door and said, "Come on in as fast as you can." So I struggle with this one. I just don't. I haven't lived it, so I struggle with it like that. There's got to be something going on. How do we become more humanitarian about this? And right now, we're not.
So Dr. Jaramola, from experience, is saying he lived in Florida, and the Miami Cuban community is anti-immigration. I heard a second-generation Cuban call new immigrants illegal. I hear this a lot from people who would identify as Chicano here in the United States, or at least in California, which blows my mind. Like, they're from LA and they're like, no, they need to come. But they're like third, fourth generation also. And maybe there's a disconnect there. But this idea that you already got the prize, right? You already the act, I forgot what it's called and I didn't write it down. That allowed Cubans to come here. The being dual citizens, or this idea that you're coming here in exile, but that you're going to go back someday or whatever, and it was all because of Castro. And why do they get that and no one else gets it? And so then you kind of, it's like if you're told you're a gang member, you act like a gang member. It's like if you're told you're the best Latinos, then you start acting like you're better than everybody else. Maybe that's the problem.
Might be on something.
Don't come at me.
That would not surprise me at all.
Okay, this is just an example of Juan is one of these people who came here as a child, and then I think he was 21 when he got arrested, and then went through the system and spent 9 weeks in prison, detention center, I think it was, and then being deported to a country that he did not know or recognize. But this idea that you lose your country once when you're leaving your home country at 11, and then at 21 when he was arrested and detained, you lose that country again in the United States. When you think that in every way, like he says here, in every way a country belongs to a human. That was what I was experiencing, because you grow up between 11 and 21. You do a lot of growing up, and that's your identity. You're American. You are in America, and you've assimilated. And then you get pulled over for some traffic violation and you end up in detention and deported. It still happens. And I don't think any of us can really comprehend what that must feel like. But
I can't fathom what it would be like I never worry that I'm going to be kicked out and sent away from my family, ripped up from my family, sent away. And off I go. And now I've got to work for years to get back. I can't fathom. So when I read that story, just the notion of it doesn't matter what he did or didn't do, traffic violation, minor, major, whatever, he is now being yanked out. And the narrative is, well, you don't belong here anyhow. You're one of those illegals. Think of all the vitriol that we espouse sometimes, that we spew everywhere about those people, right? It's always those people, and they don't belong here, and they need to do it. Well, hang on a second. He was exiled from his country. He did do it legally, right, and still got tossed. And now he's got to work for years to get back. And now his mother's life is about being an activist to get her son back. So there goes 2 years of her life that she could have been spending growing her own wealth, growing her opportunities to do more and to give to her kids and grandkids someday. Now she's doing this. I have zero ability to fathom what that must be like. But it's definitely just the sound of it. It's frightening. Just as I think around here, like, I can't imagine being yanked away from my grandkids and they cost me a lot of money. So sometimes I do want to be yanked away from them. But I can't imagine what that would be like to suddenly, you're gone. You have zero ability to connect with your family. And now good luck to you getting back. And oh, by the way, I'm gone to a place where I don't know anyone. So again, we're already talking about how difficult it is to assimilate in a place I want to be. I can't imagine what it's like to assimilate someplace where I don't even want to be here. I don't want to be in this place. Why do I have to become accustomed to it? All of that is just, I don't know how I would manage that.
So it's like the constant message, right? That there's a certain way that you have to be. There are certain things that you have to do and rules that you have to follow if you're trying to be American. And so it sounded like that's what he was doing, right? Because he was on his way to go to school, right? He was moving to go to university. And so he had done all those other things right. And then you do this one thing wrong. And in this land that apparently we're supposed to have second chances and more opportunities, you misstep once. And there's a lot of those examples everywhere where, you know, like that idea of being exceptional. And if you fuck up even a little bit, it's like no one has any faith in. Well, we all have faith, I think, because we all understand. But the system says, no, you had your one chance and that was it. And so I think that's, you know, it's like the idea of people who go into the military who are undocumented don't have an easier time of becoming an American citizen. That makes no sense to me.
0 cents. That makes none.
No sense.
That means you are the ultimate patriot. Not only are you risking your life for this country, but you're risking your life with a chance that you're not going to receive a benefit for when because you survived it. So now you come back and you won't be recognized for it whatsoever. We still don't care. And you were the ultimate patriot. You were doing this not having any option, any notion that you will absolutely be rewarded for it. That's patriotism.
Right.
But we don't classify those folks as patriots. We say, again, you can't look like those people or talk like that, have that accent, and be considered a patriot. Why? What the heck? I just have to be outraged over taxes to be considered a patriot? Oh my God, this is weird. So yeah, I think this is fascinating to me, but just absolutely heartbreaking to know that he could be yanked up like that and then say, good luck getting back now.
This might be a stretch, but I want to pull this comment up, and what you just said makes me laugh a little bit. The idea of, you know, being terrorized in that way. So I just want to share this comment, so I'm going to share it. It's this, you know, who's better than who kind of idea. And so this blows my mind that you are from Spain and you are saying that you are better than or classified as better than people in Latin America, Mexico specifically. Because if you want to talk about people not knowing their history, we can start there. We can go back to the 1400s and kind of watch that travel across the Atlantic and see where people ended up, and then have a conversation about why things ended up the way they did. Don't come at me with your bullshit.
Are you yelling at Amy?
I'm not. I said I appreciated her comment.
Right. But
I also I wanted to bring up Dr. Jermella left another message, and this was in reference to calling new immigrants, if you're already a second generation immigrant, calling new immigrants illegal. And she said it in Spanish and it sounded worse, which makes sense, that if you are someone who is saying that people from Latin American descent don't deserve to come here by the same means that you came here, and you say it in your native language, it's going to sound even worse. I get that. That resonates with me for sure. It's just like getting yelled at as a kid in Spanish. Okay. There's a little bit about global warming. I don't know if we want to talk about that. This is the last sort of thing that when she talks about Miami being ground zero, she talks about Miami's literal ground changing with the people that are living there and having access to things there, but also physically what is changing around it. And I know that when they talk about this, a lot of times when I've heard Miami being referenced every time there's a conversation about global warming and the sea levels rising, because you're like, what's going to happen to those beaches? What's going to happen to those people, those townhouses, those resorts? And you're just watching it happen. You're watching it happen.
I'll weigh in on this one. I will say, let's go here, because this one stood out for me, and I had a visceral reaction to it. I don't recall which hurricane blew through
Mm.
New Orleans anymore. We've had so many of them since. But when New Orleans was decimated and leveled, and people were in the Superdome before, the old one, all of that stuff was going on. I think it's Hurricane Andrew. I don't recall. But when that hurricane hit, I got to travel there about 3 years later, and all of New Orleans looked fantastic. I'm looking around for watermarks on the buildings or anything. Nothing. Then I drive on over stayed there for like 2 days, drove over to Florida, did some work, and then drove back. And it was interesting because on the way back, took a different route and suddenly discovered I was in the poor part of New Orleans and outskirts. And all of a sudden, oh, here's where all the poor people lived. Got it. And it's Hurricane Katrina, whichever it was. But Amy's Googled it. I'm pretty sure she figured it out. She's trying to make it sound like she knew immediately. She did a Google search. Anyhow, Hurricane Katrina goes through, and what just left me floored was to drive through to come back into New Orleans and see how those poor neighborhoods hadn't 3 years later. No, still looked like they were like a hurricane had just blown through 3 weeks ago. And I started really thinking about this, that probably what she is describing in this book is that if I have the ability to see what's happening, I kind of move myself, not because I'm thinking, oh, the seas are going to raise up and the property is going to disappear here. It's just for whatever reason, that group starts to migrate, and it's money. You have to have resources to migrate to wherever you want to go. And if you don't have those, you end up with whatever's left over. And I can absolutely see that a lot of those neighborhoods, as they're describing it, are the ones that are going to get left behind, because those who have resources will move to a higher place, a higher grounds. And not because they're, in 6 years, the ocean's going to raise. It's just because I don't know what's going on, but everyone's moving that way. I'm now comfortable with living with those folks. I don't want to live with these other folks because the neighborhood is changing. It's becoming poorer, etc. I'm going to go move here. So the system just kind of is, like you said, we go back to the system. I think the system is designed to literally do that. Those who have access and resources will move to wherever, will do whatever they need to, just out of survival, or just out of, because I have an option, or everyone's going their way. So I just went because and it all amounts to the same thing. Those who have the least are the ones who are going to be left with the property, right? So if you look around, we talk about here in drought-stricken California, and I think about all the people who are up in arms. Everything about California is going to hell in a handbasket, and folks who have the resources, they scurry away. And I think that's interesting because it's not like problems live in a certain place and never migrate. And I think that's been a wonderful conversation with this book, has been that problems, they do migrate and they just shift. We just don't quite recognize it when the time that it's happening. And I think that's going to be one of the things that is going to hit for global warming, because that becomes the property that's least valued now. And nobody wants to live there as they see the ocean starting to, the coastal line crumbling and disappearing. Money is not going to stay there. Money is going to go find someplace else to live, and poverty is going to stay there until they no longer have anything left. So I do like that part.
It also says a lot about what, because she talks about, and I hadn't thought about this, but that because of where the majority of Latinos end up living and working, they're seeing the physical changes. They're living the changes. So they don't have a question about whether or not it's happening. They know it's happening, right? But they're not in positions to make necessarily any changes to like whether or not a company is polluting the environment or things like that. So and this was the percentage, 80% of Latinos say they're worried about global warming, and more than 8 in 10 believe that it is happening. And that's because they live and work in places that make them particularly vulnerable to health and economic threats presented by climate change. So it's not, I think that education does work. It's like a few chapters ago when we talked about pesticides and where you're living and how your health can be impacted. There's no question. Farm workers do not have a question about why that is happening. They're
Right.
seeing it. They're standing there when that, puff of, or that cloud of pesticides comes their way when the wind shifts or whatever. They're seeing it. They're feeling it on their skin. And so if you said this is also having an impact on the environment and the community you're living in and the water that you're drinking, they have no reason to doubt it. They're living in it. So I thought this was
And no
really
one, well, and I said, no one cares unless it impacts them. And that's why they care and they are aware of it and they're beating the drum for it. And I appreciate it because I'm not aware of it until I read the stories and go, oh, then I do need to be more concerned. I need to be aware of that. So, but again, it goes back to just acknowledging someone's story instead of arguing with them that they're interpreting their story wrong. Like, no,
Yeah.
it's your lived experience. I'm good. I
right.
need to know what's going on.
Yes. Okay, so Amy brings up a good point here. Well, she also said that she knew the answer, that it was Katrina, but then she
I
said
don't
this.
believe her.
We
I don't believe her.
so she's talking about tornadoes in the heartland, areas not being rebuilt, new available lands, and people are going to be displaced and left with nothing. I mean, that we're going to see what the mess is, right? Eventually, maybe our kids will. I don't know. It's just so interesting to me that the way that all of this ties into like this Miami, the landscape of this city, because I don't, it's, she brought this up in the book, like people think of Miami as like a vacation spot. I don't think that we really think about people like living there and raising families there. It's just like, maybe like Hawaii is the same thing, like just like the whole state. It's like people like live there and like have families there. It's not just a vacation spot. And how arrogant and how like egocentric is that?
Very.
Please forgive me. Okay. And this is how she closes out the chapter. And I was saying yes to Andrew when you brought up Andrew earlier, because she talked about like the disaster that left behind and how, people kind of like felt like they were on their own and doing their own thing and figuring their shit out to kind of like come out of it.
Yeah.
But she's saying, we're all still going through our own shit, but we're noticing that our struggles have more in common than we ever imagined. And says that, as disasters happen and maybe other things happen, not just natural disasters, that it does seem like people are coming together based on like these identities. I mean, we're talking about Latino identities because of this book, but this Latinx identities that's why maybe people are coming together to help each other out in places like Miami, where they can see that there's like this slow deterioration or trying to rebuild and figuring out, who, oh, we lost Richard, who deserves it, who has access to it, as it's slowly like sinking into the ocean.
And I think that is part of it, where more and more people have the ability. This is the only credit I will ever give to social media, because I think it's the bane of existence these days. But I think the thing that is useful, incredibly important about social media, is that it is allowing folks who are experiencing the same things to talk to each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be this unifying force where, we're starting to realize more and more, maybe a slightly different circumstance, but it's still having the same result, same impact. Okay, maybe we do have something we share in common about how do we work together to overcome that obstacle in the future, because it's just going to cycle. It'll look different, but it'll have the same impact again. And how do we move through that together? And I think that's the only, I don't care how much Richard has a great idea. This is the only good thing about social media. Other than that, there's no value whatsoever. At least that's what Tracy and I were talking about.
But that's huge, right? It's belonging and connection. Even like us right now, via this live stream, it's like, you live so far away from us. Like there would be no opportunity for us to do that on a regular basis. So connecting and having these conversations, and finding people that you are identifying on social media, it makes sense for our mental health, but also for this idea that we're connected as human beings. It's kind of weird to think of social media as allowing a space for more humanity, but
Well, that's because this is, and I'll stop here because this is where I'm going to ramble, and now I've become the old guy. Yeah, back in my day, we used stone tablets and smokes. And anyway, so I think the greatest example, and I stand on this one, and I brag about kids all the time when I think about when they were fed up with Marjorie Stone, the Marjorie Stone Douglas, Marjorie Douglas Stone, Amy will type it in later. Anyhow, when they were incredibly upset about that, they went out and they did something that my generation was never, ever able to do. Within weeks, within a few short weeks, they organized an entire nation of students to go out and protest.
Yeah.
All right. All because they were experiencing and seeing, and they felt it, and it was visceral for them. And they said, let's organize. And they use social media in a way that those of us who are immigrants to that world of technology and social media, we don't have that ability, but they could do it just like that. And I think they, again, they are natives of technology, and they are going to use it in a way. And this is what we're seeing, that the book is written by folks who are significantly younger than an old man like me, and they're figuring out how do we connect with each other, because we are discovering we have so many things in common. So I think that's where we're headed with that. So I will give social media that credit. And I think it's going to be great for how young folks use it to really connect and start to make some changes that move along at a much more rapid pace than what we've been able to do. And I think that's part of what's scaring the rest of the world. The older, the wider, the more you are, the more you're scared, because the culture war is just a matter of culture shifts because of everybody that comes into it. And I bring all of our experiences come in, and it kind of changes things a little bit. That's where we're outraged right now. Hey, come over. You're in America now. So, no, stop it. America's changing. Just relax.
It's weird how quickly, I'm going to say some of us, because I don't know if you have this same feeling, but I know that some of us, as soon as we hear a conversation heading into like the good old days or back in my day or whatever, and it's like, good old days for who? What are you even talking about? There's no such thing. Like, no one had the perfect life ever. Even if you think you did, we're talking like alcohol, drugs, money, like all the shit that could corrupt, did corrupt. And the pretty paintings and the nice conversations because we were forced not to talk about things that were difficult. You can miss me with the good old days bullshit. We're just human.
Well, I love it.
And we're going through shit, and we have to know what the struggles are so that we can help the future generations avoid those struggles. What this crap about everyone should be struggling, and that those were the good old days when everybody struggled? Fuck off.
That's you said it far more concise than I've ever said it. I was thinking the same thing. I just keep forgetting that we can cuss on this show. So golly gosh darn it. Take that.
Yes. So I get very passionate about that.
Well, you think about it, we always talk about, well, back in my day, we didn't have these seat belts and we didn't have these helmet laws. And there's a reason why we now have laws around seat belts and helmets, because there were a bunch of us that didn't quite make it. You're talking about. So yeah, I hear that all the time about back in our day, back when I was a kid. Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a reason why we no longer do that, but go for it, whatever you believe, right? And now you have an accident at 30, 45 miles an hour. And instead of going up to the hospital, you got to go off and buy a new car because you're fine. Your car exploded into a million billion pieces.
Right.
Because it's designed to do that. It's designed to absorb that. And so that's what it does. But we act as though back in our day, it was a whole lot better when we had our big giant Buick, and no, it wasn't. And there's a reason why things change over a period of time. So
I had to add Amy's comment here.
I don't see a problem with that.
We're not going to go backwards. Make your own damn sandwich.
Okay, what's your point?
I wanted to bring. I closed Instagram, but I wanted to bring up this Latinx parenting. She talked this whole idea of like the good old days. What it reminds me of a lot of times is the idea that it was okay to like beat children. It's okay like to beat up not just your kids, but like other people's kids. So I don't know if you can see Latinx parenting on Instagram. I don't know if you can read it there. Latinx parenting. And her hashtag is end chancla culture. If you don't know what a chancla is, it's any sandal or flip flop or whatever that you can throw
Yes.
it. Okay, so that's a chancla. Let me put I'll put it in here, the hashtag. And so she's got, you know, like workshops for parents and educators too, if you really want to, you know, talk about community. Sorry, I'm having a hard time talking and typing at the same time. Let me share this. And chancla culture, and she talks about like you know, trauma-informed parenting. Like we talk about that in education, right? And how we want educators to have these trauma-informed discipline practices. Well, why aren't we doing that for parents also at home? And so I just wanted to share this because we were talking about like the good old days or whatever. And so it's like, we should not be traumatizing future generations. There are other ways to deal with the different ways that our brains function and the different personalities of all of these little humans that we're supposed to be taking care of. So, and chancla culture, and look her up. She's got some great stuff. Her videos can be kind of funny, but also a little triggering. I'm laughing because I'm traumatized. Okay.
I'm laughing because I refuse to say anything that may be used against me right now, because I may or may not have spanked a child or two.
Or been spanked.
I got some of them too. That's also part of my trauma right now. I'm fine.
Absolutely. All right. Next week, April 25th, we're working on chapter 8, and it is called Erased. And I didn't look at the map, so I don't know where we're going next. But if you've got the book, you can look it up, find out where we're going next week. Thank you so much, Mike, for joining us. We went way over. I appreciate you spending your time with us.
I blame Amy.
Thank you, Mike.
My pleasure. It's Amy's fault we went over.
Let's blame her. Thank you, Amy, for participating. Thank you to everyone who was on the chat, sharing your comments. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next week. Bye.
See you guys.